Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining me for this second and last Zoom meeting that we will have. Like last time, I have a couple of slides, sort of reminders of some of the things that you've been exposed to, and whether it's through the lectures, the lecture, or the guest interview, or some of the readings that I've suggested, but just things that complement that, and things that I think also to keep in mind. And then the latter part of the meeting will be to answer your questions. And there've been some really, really great questions on the forums. And like I said, I've tried to answer as many as I could. I've shared as many as I could in the midweek and end of week message, but really just some really good things, and some great ideas and suggestions that I'm like, oh, I didn't think of that, and I'd like to try that. Or has that response or that approach or that thought been presented in our newsrooms and in the work that we're doing, both at the Fulcrum and at Latino News Network? So let me share my screen so that I can go over this little deck that I came up with, and then we can chat. All right. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was, and this applies. Obviously, this MOOC is focused on climate solutions, but I think it applies to any solutions journalism story, and that's about making it accountable, right? We want to produce stories that, solutions journalism or not, right? That there is some sort of accountability in regard to what is the finish line look like for this story. And a lot of the conversations that I've had in the forums have been about that fine line of journalism and advocacy that many of you, including myself, are very cognizant of, right? We don't, solutions journalism isn't about advocating, although I would argue, isn't journalism that, right? Isn't our job to hold the powerful accountable and give voice to the voiceless? We are in a organic situation to advocate for those communities that, or more often than not, don't have the resources or the voice or the platform or the structure to be able to not only survive but thrive. With that said, I do think that accountability is very important, and how we do it in a way that isn't advocacy is really by applying the four pillars of solutions journalism. The 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 focus on the responses, the insights, and the evidence and limitations ultimately are self-evident, and that's one of the things that I really um, like about solutions journalism, is that at the end of the day, whether it's because of political ideology or other, you might not like the story that I wrote or that someone in our newsroom wrote, but you will be hard pressed to disagree with how the news was gathered, because you're being transparent about the how it was gathered and the information. And I think that whether the end result is a positive one to the individual, the company, or the organization or not, that's self-evident. And we never walk into the room with an agenda of, I'm producing a story and I know what the finish line looks like. No, I'm approaching the story with a question. And the news gathering and the four pillars will determine what the finish line looks like. So, this is something that one of my colleagues shared that I think could be very useful. Let me see if I could move this because I can't see everything. That I think is very useful when you're thinking about accountability. So, the as I mentioned, it's about questions, right? Who is being harmed? Who's doing the harming? What is being done about it, right? What is that response? And now you apply the four pillars in answering those questions by looking at the response to the social problem, distilling lessons, right? So the insights, the evidence, the effectiveness. I think if you organize yourself in asking these questions first, and then applying the four pillars, it's really going to not only help you organize your story, but also craft some questions that you should have in approaching your story. Uh-oh. What can I see? What did I do? Okay, great. So when it comes to accountability and solutions reporting, and really, if you're feeling uncomfortable about that fine line of advocating versus journalism, these are the questions to have. This is how you apply the four pillars, and never walk into a story with an assumption of what the results should be. Be open-minded in what the results will be one way or the other, and you will steer clear of advocating. Another thing I wanted to, another aspect that I wanted to share with you was something that was shared by last week by one of the authors that I share with you from out of Puerto Rico, that really talked about developing relationships and being very mindful of causing no harm, right? And as journalists, we don't want to cause harm with our reporting, whether it's exploiting a community that is vulnerable, or producing a story that is necessarily with an agenda, right? That isn't necessarily adding value to the conversation or debate. So, in thinking about relationships and building relationships, I wanted to share some of her thoughts, because I think a lot of times what happens is, with the criticism that journalists and media get, is that we only show up when something bad happens, right? And I live in the United States. I live in Chicago, and a lot of times what happens, especially with big mainstream media, an unfortunate situation, a school shooting, a hurricane, a tornado, some sort of um, disaster that garners the attention from a national perspective. And so you have this media descend upon the community that is, more often than not, um, feel invisible to media, and they feel exploited. They feel like you're writing stories, right? You're from New York, you're from Los Angeles, you're coming to El Paso, which is a border state, and you're producing stories as a tourist, right? You have no idea about this community, and how this community, the challenges of this community, or how this community has worked together in solving some of these issues. And you think, by spending a week with us, that you can produce a story that accurately depicts who we are. And the answer, of course, is no. The best journalism that happens in communities like that are the ones that are being produced by the local news outlets. But even with them, you have to establish a relationship that um, supersedes the situation that you're covering. If the first time they're hearing from you is based on your assignment, then you're already falling behind in regards to creating or building trust. But if you, in a less pressured situation, are looking to build a relationship by listening, right? Engaging in a less pressured situation where you're listening and getting a better understanding of this community and their hopes and dreams. And then you have an opportunity also to introduce yourself from the perspective of your news outlet, from the perspective as a professional and personally. Then when you do show up in those high pressured situations, you're no longer a stranger. And the skepticism, as well as the defensiveness, I'm not saying it's not going to be there, but it is going to be a, a smaller hurdle to get through. So, um, how do community starts with us, right? And some of the things that I've said, but again, to reinforce, it has to be strategic, and creating a team that really, like in so many projects, is looking at the opportunity from a perspective that's less pressured. If you want to cover a community, whether it's geography, whether it's um, a specific niche, gender, race, age, occupation, it is very important to first take a step back and strategize about what that approach should look like and ask some real questions. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to engage with this particular community? You have to answer those questions in-house first, because those are going to be the questions they're going to ask you when you engage with them. And so then when you're establishing agreements with community, and I'm not talking about a written MOU, but there has to be, in any relationship, you got to set the ground rules, right? And and that way, then it is very transparent and open what it is that you're looking from them, but also what they're looking from you as a new local news outlet. I'm part of a of a project with news ambassadors here in Illinois, that it's stage one and stage two. We strategized about identifying geographically a neighborhood outside of Chicago, so in the suburbs, to ask the question, what does the Hispanic Latino community in Berwyn need from local news? And step one was for us to talk about, how are we going to do that? How are we going to engage this? How are we going to engage the community? How are we going to introduce ourselves to the community? And part of that was identifying organizations that are already embedded in the community for us to present to, and hopefully they introduce us to this community, as well as creating a community conversation where we physically are there and are very transparent about what this project is about, and then what the end result is. Because step one is engagement, and step two, in first quarter of 2025, is producing solutions journalism stories based on the survey that we're asking them to fill out, which is around, again, what it is that the Hispanic Latino community in Berwyn needs from local media. So you strategize, you identify potential partners, people that are already working with the community, and of course you do your research, right? You want to do your research about the community. You don't want to make any assumptions. You want to leave some room for what you don't know, right? You only know what you don't know. And then that way, that the approach of engagement and developing the relationship is much more transparent and organic, and from a position of, we don't want to assume what you need. We want you to help guide us in what the emphasis from a subject matter should be in regards to our reporting. So in essence, saying, you're more than just our audience. You really are contributors that help shape our reporting. And that's really powerful. And when you tell someone, hey, in essence, right, we need your help, you're giving them, you're empowering them in a way that is uncommon. And you will find, at least my experience, is that they're not only appreciative, but they really help you see situations from a perspective that you could have never imagined. All right. So I already talked about this, listening and being flexible, not making assumptions. I really think that in doing listening, a lot of listening, the content that you shape is much more dynamic. And then being flexible, because you can do all the research you want, you engage with the right organizations, but there's always that element of, I didn't know that, or I, despite all of the work that I've done, here's an unknown, and that will, trust me, will happen more often than not. Relationship, right? Partnerships. I mentioned that already. Hiring people. Well, I think that having skin in the game. So some projects, even ourselves, we are working with. We created fellowships, and so we have people in the community that are helping to do some of the research for us, and I think that's really important. That also talks about budgets, and that's a whole other thing, but I think, and then lastly, the power of diversity is we chose this neighborhood because that's what, in engaging other organizations, including media, told us there's an opportunity in that there's little known about this particular community, because Chicago, being the third largest city in the United States, gets the lion's share of attention. And then and whether it's Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, right? As soon as you leave that major hub, you've got these, whether it's suburbs or rural areas, you really have these news deserts, whether it's a lack of local journalism or just not having that spotlight that these major hubs, major cities have. These are communities that are civically engaged, but are often never spoken to or seen. And there is that opportunity from a journalism standpoint to lend your platform for communities that might be separated by geography and all of the different facets of diversity that could really use some of the visibility that your reporting and your platform provides. The last two things I wanted to mention was what our guest speaker talked about, and I hope you read her piece about some of the most popular questions that she gets when it comes to solutions journalism. I think the two that I wanted to point out was, should each of the four pillars of solutions journalism occupy equal space in my story? And the answer is no. I think each story will define itself in regards to which area of the four pillars requires more attention, more space, more time. I don't think you should ever strive to produce a story where it has four equal parts, depending on the focus of the story, depending on the social problem, the response. Each of the four pillars, while they need to be present, don't need to be present equally. And then the other thing that jumped out at me from Swati's piece was, what works as evidence can you count on anecdotal evidence? Look, one of the questions that I found very interesting in the forums was talking about qualitative evidence, which is really important, right? When it comes to climate coverage, there's so much science, there's so much data, and data absolutely is very useful in dictating editorially the focus of stories. And it is also a lot of what we can leverage in regards to evidence and limitations and insights, but it could go over people's heads if all you're focusing is on the science. We need to put a face, put a situation that is real, that people can digest and understand, that comes from the science. And that's really powerful in not only helping people understand the response, the social problem, but also inspiring them to act, right? They're being informed by your reporting. They're being educated by your reporting. The hope is that they're empowered to act, whether it's voting, whether it's joining an organization in their neighborhood, or they just personally looking to be involved, even if it's just getting more information about a particular subject. So while the science is very important and it provides a lot of insights and evidence, there's no substitution for qualitative data and anecdotal examples to really bring the stories home and relevant to your target audience. So those were the things that I wanted to share before our conversation that I really felt were relevant to what I was engaging with you and the forum on the forums, and also what I was think could complement from what we covered this week. But now I wanted to hand it off to you to see if there are any questions that you have that you want to discuss or I can help you with. You could jump in, you could raise your hand, you could send a question on the chat.
Hi, I have a question.
Hi. Your
Thanks
name is?
so much. My name's Ty.
Ty.
Thank you so much for this 2-week course. It's been really great learning and seeing all the resources you're sharing. I'm curious how do we adopt and adapt a version of what you're teaching us to then talk to decision makers in newsrooms? Because I've historically found that when it comes to reaching out to the community and to people in the community and building relationships, like I always want to do that ahead of time, not when the wildfire hits, like build that. But oftentimes, given the pressures we have in this industry, that's not necessarily prioritized in the workflow of newsrooms. So how do we get buy-in from the decision makers in our newsroom that let us invest that time in building those relationships with communities so that we're not extractive storytellers?
Yep. Look, that's an excellent question. And that is the perpetual challenge that journalists have, especially with newsroom managers. I just happen to have had that similar conversation with another group this week. As a solutions journalism practitioner, and also a newsroom leader, solutions journalism is multifaceted, and in my opinion, cannot just be the story. That's certainly a part of it, but what you really need to strive is to change the newsroom culture. And so, and it's easy for me to say because I'm a publisher, right? So I'm the decision maker. But I recently joined the Fulcrum, which is a news outlet focusing on democracy, not politics, and we can talk about that later. But I became acquainted with this news outlet through work that I was doing with the Latino News Network. And in the process of developing a relationship, really, I think, did an effective job of selling them solutions journalism to the point where they hired me as a director of solutions journalism. So that took a couple of months to do. And what I talked to them about was, yes, focus on producing solutions journalism for all of the reasons that we've talked about in the last 2 weeks, right? The 4 pillars, transparency, building trust, being transparent. But if you really want to be effective, solutions journalism can't be thought of at the end. It needs to be every process. So in our newsroom at LNN and now at the Fulcrum, it's integrating the 4 pillars when you're doing research to pitch a story, so that when you get to pitch the story, those 4 pillars are evidence and you are already pitching on the response and why the response is important in telling the story. And then that also shapes not only it shapes how you package the story, who gets to tell the story, and it gets you to the end result. So strive to not just get your managers to approve solutions journalism stories, start having conversations about how solutions journalism can change the newsroom culture. And it's really important that you nuance that conversation depending on who's in front of you. We are perpetually managing up, managing across, and managing down. So the conversation that I had with the Fulcrum publishers was one part editorial, but it was also one part about points of differentiation for the Fulcrum and other news outlets, which then got us to talking about the business side of publishing. If you want to be competitive, if you want to be competitive in the fast food restaurant, I'm not going to pitch you. I want to open another fast food restaurant focusing on cheeseburgers. When you've got Wendy's and McDonald's and Burger King, the first question, I want a small business loan. They're going to ask me, it's like, well, how are you going to be different from these three and others, right? You have to look for points of differentiation. So if you're talking to a newsroom manager who part of their responsibility is growing audiences, is looking to be competitive with other news outlets, your approach needs to be from a perspective of points of differentiation that can also affect growing audiences. If you're talking to your colleagues, it's a similar dissimilar conversation about editorially doing better for who we're serving, and also points of differentiation with the competition. And then if you're a newsroom manager and you're talking, as I do, with editors and reporters, it is about telling them this is how it makes your reporting better, and this is how it'll help you engage and build trust with the audiences. So you have to first um, know who you're, take a step back and have different approaches to depending on who you're speaking to, and then speak their language when you speak to about solutions journalism. But I think you can start the conversation about a particular story. But I think if you have a larger discussion about changing the newsroom culture, oh, you'll be much more effective. And then the last thing on that is it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Whether it's solutions journalism or anything else, when you present something new to whoever you're speaking to, you need to understand that we as human beings, we strive to be comfortable. We don't want anything that is going to disrupt our daily lives. We want to be comfortable. So any new idea, psychologically, whether you say it or not, you're asking them to change. You are a change agent. So you don't want to be a bull in a china shop type of change agent, right? Fast and destructive. You might get some things done, but just as quickly as you introduce the change will go away. You have to think about being progressive, playing the long game, thinking about this opportunity. And I always think in quarters. What does changing the newsroom culture look like in the next year? And you identify tent poles every 3 months, because those are going to be the North Stars to guide you in that change. And along the way, you're going to pivot in reaching that first goal. And reaching that first goal is going to shape reaching the next goal, meaning the next 3 months and the next 3 months. That's easier for people to consume. And now they've got a calendar to follow that you can help in helping them lead, as opposed to all in on a proposal for change.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Everybody has everything figured out. There's one thing I wanted to bring up.
Sorry,
Oh,
please,
oh,
sorry.
okay,
Please.
great.
Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah. Actually, good evening. I don't know the time range here, so I don't know the time range for each of us, but it's 6 p.m. and 6 p.m. in my own time in Nigeria. So I want to ask a question. I think it's good we give like a life, maybe like a real life experience of how it is to report a social journalism story, because this is my first time I'm trying to do a course on it. So I've had a webinar on it, a Google Meet meeting or training on it before, but I didn't go for the pitch because it was abstract. I'm always good with op-ed writing, article writing, opinionated writings. But when it's solution journalism, that means you have to go out, you have to relate with people, you have to do some process, committee engagement, and so on. So can you give us like a life experience of how it was for you, how you did it, and how you were able to schedule some orders and so on like that. It's like a live experience of how it can be for someone that is building or wishing to someone that really wants to do it. Like taking this course is actually a sense of intentionality. So that's my question.
Okay, so and sorry, sometimes the connection is a little bit rough, but I think if the question was about a real example in regards to producing, executing solution journalism, the best example I can give you is my first example. When I first got involved with solutions journalism, very much like you, I participated in a training session. It isn't that I didn't buy into the four pillars. I think very much part of my work 30 plus years has involved the four pillars in some fashion, sometimes all four, sometimes two out of four, one out of four, etc. But I really felt that was a lot to swallow. I'm like, how are we going to do a story integrating the four pillars? There's just so much information. And I just felt understanding how in general, depending on the platform, people consume news and information. It just felt like it's just people are just going to glaze over. So one of the things that helped me, that my instructor shared with me, was to I look at the solutions journalism story that I wanted to produce as a pizza pie, right? And individual slices. I didn't have to produce my first story. I didn't have to produce a pie. I just needed to focus on one of the slices of that pie. And so what I ended up doing was doing four stories, each one focused on each of the pillars, which got me the opportunity to really unpack the response, unpack the evidence, unpack the 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 insights, unpack the limitations, and in a way that was for the consumer, right? For the audience, the reader, to be able to consume. And then at the end, there was in the beginning, right? The bookends was this is the story, right? This is the balcony view of the story. Today, we're going to focus on the response. And at the end, there was the promise of in the next part of this series, we're going to focus on the insights, and then the other one on limitations, and the other one about evidence. And that really helped me organize my reporting. It helped me feel better about the storytelling and being mindful of my audience. Later, I became much more adept in producing journalism, solution journalism stories in both for audio, for video, and was able to be much more focused in that I felt, okay, I can deliver the whole pie in one sitting. But I think that's the first approach. So after you identify what the social problem is, and you identify the response to that social problem, don't see it holistically. Divide it into slices and start your reporting first and foremost by focusing on the response, and then that will help you with the other slices, the other the other pillars. And at the end of the day, then you'll have a very comprehensive report that people can read and digest or consume, whether it's audio or video, in different parts that's much more feasible. Any other questions? Whether you text them or unmute yourself. I have a question to share that was made in the forums, and it was about greenwashing. And I forget the person, so I'm sorry, but I will include it in the end of week message. So the question was like, how do you avoid greenwashing? Um, there are so many organizations, companies, individuals that make pie in the sky promises, whether it's about a new product, a new service, um, legislation that seeks to right wrongs or counter um, uh, uh, a problem. So the question is, what's greenwashing? Greenwashing is when an individual over oversells what a service um, or a process, a response is, right? So I might say to you, I I have a new product that is going to help even a product like a washing oh no, a lawnmower. I have a new electric lawnmower that is going to that is better than uh, uh, gas run lawn mowers, and it's better for the environment because it's electric, and I could say the same thing about electric cars, right, or hybrids. So greenwashing is they sell you like, God, this is so much better. It's going to help the environment, whether it's uh, the quality of the air or the water, what have you. And so what happens is we receive these press releases, or an elected official is going to make this announcement, and this is our assignment. And so the question was, well, how do we sift through some of the BS? Because that's what it is. What greenwashing is equals BS. Well, how you counter it is through solutions journalism, by first saying, well, that's great. Yeah, an electric lawnmower sounds like a good idea. I'm familiar with electric products, primarily electric cars or hybrids. But when you ask, well, let's talk about electric lawnmowers as a response to what you're saying is in improving gas emissions, right? Because many of the lawnmowers or traditionally have been gas powered, gasoline powered. Then now you're asking a better. Now it's solutions journalism is helping you shape the question that you need to ask of the person or company or organization that is selling you why this particular product is better for the environment. And then their response and your research will dictate whether or not what they're selling is as effective as they say it is or not. And if it's a proposal, it's been my experience, there there is there are very few original ideas. There are plenty of new ideas that borrow from other responses, other ideas. So if you're proposing, say, in Paterson, New Jersey, inner city in New Jersey, the the mayor launched a new project it's solar powered trash cans, trash and also recycling. And so the what this does is it's solar, right? Okay, great. And as you put your garbage, the machine pushes it down. And so when it's full, it it tells the city workers, okay, it's time to collect the trash, time to collect recycling. Um, because the machine compacts everything, it is saving space, it's solar powered. So the idea is this is going to help people not just throw trash on the street, but a lot of times they are well intentioned and they put trash in the trash dispenser, but then it overflows. So, okay, got it. My question was, sounds like a great idea. Where is this coming from? Where has this been introduced before that you feel this is going to work here? So whether they're introducing something else by applying solutions journalism, it helps you do some research and say, you're introducing something new to Paterson, but this isn't new to cities like Paterson. In fact, what you're going to enact has been enacted. I'm making it up in Toledo, and they have that response is in year 2. Here are the results of how that's worked. In my example, let's say it hasn't worked well. If it hasn't worked well in Toledo, why do you think it's going to work in Paterson? Right? But that's the question. You're introducing something new based on that's already been introduced somewhere else. You as a journalist now have a response, 2 years worth of insights and evidence and limitations that help shape the questions that you're going to use to this elected official or company that's introducing something new to this community. That by applying the pillars in your reporting, it'll help decipher some of the BS that's out there, and really avoid you producing a story that is a pie in the sky. Oh, we went to a press conference. Here's the information we received. Here's the data that they provided and how it's going to help, the environment. But that's not reporting. That's basically regurgitating a very scripted message that they're looking to use your platform to help promote and market their products. I have a question from Usuario. Hello from Granada, Spain. About the format, there is significant tension between traditional media and social networks. In parallel and connected to this, there's the issue of long-form journalism versus the snack culture, everything quick and immediate. In the case of climate coverage, can this solutions-focused approach be adapted to short formats? It seems like it requires a good amount of development time and attention for the audience. So, great question, and I don't know if you were here, Osadio, when I was talking about the pizza analogy, right? Yes, sometimes it could be overwhelming to produce any story, even in traditional media platforms, a solutions journalism story. So just focus on the pizza. Just, focus on the slice. Focus on the response. Then focus on the evidence. Then focus on the insights. Then focus on the limitations. And I think with social media, at least in the United States, every time they're polled, a majority of people in the United States say they're getting their news and information and entertainment on social media. And they don't say, oh yeah, I saw a link on X or Facebook about a story, and then they're going to the story. No, they're saying they're going to Instagram and TikTok and X and Facebook as one-stop shopping for their news and information. So it's really important to understand the power of social media, but also understand the nuances between even just the 4 that I described and how people are consuming news and information and entertainment. And I think if you look at solutions journalism in pieces of pie, you can work within the parameters of social media in producing solutions journalism story in a way that is very creative and organic to how the people in that platform are consuming content in general. Now, in regards to traditional media, part of the problem with traditional media is that you have a lot of people like me, 54 years old and older, that I didn't grow up with social media, right? The the digital platform matured when I was already my 30s. So when it comes to social media, I've had to learn um, that platform and continuously learn that platform. But many of you, you've never known a world without the digital platform, let alone some of the social media platforms. So there's an experience that you have that I'll never have um, in producing content that is informative and educational and empowering. I think that needs to be applied not only on social media, but in the next evolution of newspapers, in the next evolution of radio or audio programming, in the next evolution of video and television programming. I think people like me don't spend enough time listening to a lot of people like yourselves, right? A certain demographic in regards to how can we package content so that it is informative, entertaining to a certain degree, and empowering. Um, I think you can accomplish that with solutions journalism if you look at it in slices and not as the whole. I don't, I don't, I've never seen anything on TikTok or maybe Instagram, maybe Facebook, but that has the whole. But don't use social media as a means to drive, as just a means to drive people to another place. Think about what you can produce to complement that, that is one-stop shopping, because that's what their expectation is. All right, we're coming down to the end of our Zoom meeting.
I do have a question if I can comment.
Please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tazeen. I'm from India. I wanted to take forward your point of greenwashing. Now, I do get there are a lot of projects that come up even locally that talks about sustainability and eco-friendly. For example, in let's say the jewelry sector or the fashion sector. So when it comes to big brands, of course, there are global certifications. But what about verifying smaller scale initiatives? How do we do that?
So, excellent question. How do you verify small scale if they don't have the evidence, right? The data to be able to, for you to be able to take a look at the effectiveness or lack thereof. I think if that particular response is, again, where else is this happening, right? And what other organizations, companies are doing similarly? Because if they don't have it, just like my example with the electric lawnmower or the solar garbage cans and recycling bins, there has to be another organization that is doing the same or has tried the same. And that's really important for us to do. Sometimes, especially in local media, we are so hyper focused on what's happening here and now that we don't take the time, figuratively and physically, to step back and stand up and say, well, this challenge or this proposal cannot be unique to us. Somewhere within our state, our country, our planet, someone else has tried this or is trying this. So it's about asking them, first and foremost, how did this response originate? And hopefully they'll tell you it's based on other best practices and lessons learned. If not that, then you in your researching do the same. And then you can collect that data, and it might be apples and oranges, right? I live in the city of Chicago, so solving for gun violence in Chicago will be similar and dissimilar in solving gun violence in New York City and in Los Angeles, comparable cities. But it is not unique to Chicago. It's not unique to those three major markets. And there are other cities like Houston, smaller cities, Cincinnati, that have similar challenges, perhaps not to the degree of these larger metro areas, but I can draw from the response and the evidence and insights and limitations of those responses in applying it to this new proposal. So if they don't have the data to offer you, if they don't tell you, at least point you in the right direction of why they're introducing this based on best practices and lessons learned elsewhere, then it is on you to research and investigate where this is happening elsewhere in order to apply it to your reporting and in your questioning. Is it going to be a mirror? Of course not. There's going to be certain nuances of why this particular response works elsewhere and might or might not work here, but at least it gives you a starting point, as opposed to, we don't have that information. And that's it. And disclosing, they don't have that information. There's a little more digging you can do. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. We have a question from Barbara Grady.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for this great course, Hugo. And that answer you just gave partly helps with this question. You know, there are many climate solution technologies being proposed, as you well know, and I'm a sustainability reporter and do stories on some of them. And I've been thinking that it would be appropriate to, you know, use these 4 pillars in looking at these solutions. Would you suggest any others, or like, is there added scrutiny that needs to go with all these startups with climate solutions?
Yeah, look, I think today I was in a meeting for the Fulcrum with a third party. It's an organization. I'm forgetting their name. Did I write it down? It's NCL, National Civic League. National Civic League is an organization that's been around for, my goodness, 50 plus years. So we're having this conversation about a program that they want to enact that is focused on identifying communities to instruct, educate, inspire to be civically involved. This program that they want to enact is based on their organization's history, focused on civic engagement. But the initiative that they want to try is new. So the conversations we had with the Fulcrum was, there's an alignment, right? There's an intersection between covering democracy and civic engagement in this organization. So the conversation started about the end result. This is what this initiative hopes to achieve. Very similarly to your question, right? There's a lot of people and organizations, governments, that are talking about ideas that they want to enact. Many of them many if not all, right? Based on science, data, including, as I've said ad nauseum, right? Best practices and lessons learned. What I told them was, I am not interested solely on the end result. I'm interested in, from a storytelling perspective, in the journey, because that's important too. Don't think about the solution in solutions journalism. When you think about the 4 pillars, you can apply them to an idea and tell that story as it unravels. You can almost in real time talk about the response that's happening and talk about the evidence that's being collected and the insights that are being collected And then ultimately, right, when you get to the finish line or near the finish line, you're talking about the limitations that of why this didn't work. Because then this will then be applied to the next edition of this response. So to answer your question, Barbara, don't shy away from some of these perhaps smaller or initiatives where perhaps there's some lack of response. Engage in a conversation about unfolding that story and tell the audience, here's something we're going to follow for the next couple of weeks or months. And be very transparent about this is what the goal is. Whether or not the goal will be met, we're going to find out. And I will report to you. Our news organization is dedicated to following this story to be able to provide you with the evidence, insights, and limitations of this response. I think that's really interesting. And I think a lot of times, especially with solutions journalism, people are thinking, I have to produce something that's working. No, you don't. There's a lot to learn from things that don't work. And I think it's really interesting to tell stories as they're unfolding from a solutions journalism standpoint.
Hello, Hugo. Hi.
Hi.
Can I jump in? My name is Wanja. Thank you very much. Yes, I am African. Thank you so much for the insight that you have been giving and sharing with us. I'm learning a lot. Now, I'm going to ask you a question just to add on what you just said, where when you're pursuing a story and there's no available data, how you should treat that. The reason I'm asking this is because looking at it from an African lens, where I realize that we work with a lot of raw information, interventions for environmental and climate change by communities that has no data. There's no data what was happening prior, and there's no data what they're exactly doing. What you have on the ground is experiments or interventions that work or that seem to work. So if I'm going to approach that story using the lens that you just gave me, where does that leave me?
Great. And Waja's question will be the last one, unfortunately. So Waja, you just reminded me, one of the most important things we need to do is talk to people that are actually on the front lines of these responses. A lot of times we're talking to the scientists and we're talking to the elected officials and we're talking to the organizations, right? We're talking to, as we should, with people with power and resources and influence. But we have to turn around and we got to talk to the people that often are spoken about, that are often affected by these decisions, and that's the community. And not just the community, but don't just talk to the president of this company. Talk to the people that work for the president, right? Don't talk just to the elected official. Talk to the people that work in that office. A lot of times, these people have, because they're working with the decision makers, have a lot of insights, evidence, limitations about those responses that have a different perspective than the leader of that organization, whose messaging is very designed, right, to protect the brand of the organization. So that's one. But with the people, right? Yes.
I'm saying that's actually very, very right. Very, very right. That is my approach to journalism when I'm talking about solutions and being community centered. I always go to the basics, to the people who are doing these things. But I have one problem, or rather, I have observed one problem, that editors and publications are inclined to want to lead with the high-powered players. They want to talk about the president, they want to talk about the CEO, and they have very little space for the community, the people that are actually living these things, experiencing these climate change problems, and necessity is forcing them to invent solutions to these problems. But these kind of stories don't get frontline coverage in our news media. So how do we change this narrative to make the editors turn towards these people who are actually making the difference actually on the ground?
Yeah, yeah. So before I answer that question, I do want to finish my thought of one of the things you said. I think a lot of times when we go to the communities that are in the front lines and are trying to or solving the problem, there's not, the data isn't collected because they're too busy, right, working the problem to actually put it on a nice spreadsheet and talk about, the data. But that's still very, very powerful because these are lived experiences and anecdotes that, while qualitative data, that while it's not quantitative, can certainly help shape or give a picture to some of the qualitative data. So I think telling those stories from their first person perspective is so very powerful. Now, the other question that you have is, that's really difficult, right? Earlier I talked about, we manage up, we manage across, we manage down. We need to know who our audience is. So if I'm talking to a superior, I have to understand where this person's coming from, which is in part what I, the storyteller, the journalist, right? He or she is concerned about the editorial, but they're also concerned about budgets. They're also concerned about audience engagement and audience growth, a myriad of things. So if I'm going to have a conversation with this person, I need to understand where they're coming from in order to speak their language and talk to them about why I think it's important to elevate the visibility and voices of the people in the front line and not just the decision makers. That conversation is going to be similar and dissimilar when I'm talking to my colleagues, my editors, my fellow reporters, and similarly to people that I work with in research, etc. So understanding their perspective in how they consume information is going to be very important in how nuanced I am in having those conversations. Look, I've been in newsrooms where even though everything I said, I tried, there are situations where my managers have said, yeah, I see the data. Yeah, it says we should be emphasizing this and that, but based on their biases, and I would say arrogance, they dismiss the data and they said, yeah, but we're going to do it this way because it's their gut feeling. In those situations, it is a personal decision you need to make. I've been in those situations where I've said, well, what are my options? I can continue to try to swim against the tide and fight the good fight with little to no results, or I can walk away. That's a personal decision. We all have responsibilities. I'm married. I've got 2 kids, college, right? Blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, and not making a decision in a vacuum, right? Because I have a family. It's been more important for me to be in a situation where I feel as a journalist, I am fulfilling my responsibility to the people that I serve. That's so much more important to me than a paycheck. Because if that's not how I align myself, then that paycheck becomes the price that I'm willing to accept for a situation that I personally believe is incorrect, improper, unethical. And I have to leave you with that. This has been really, really great questions. You all have my contact information. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me with any other questions that you have, any ideas that you have, in any way that I can help you on your solutions journalism journey. I'm happy to do so. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for these last 2 weeks. Good luck. And I do hope you stay in touch. Bye-bye.